With the sheer number of years that G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero was available in toy stores, many children of the 80s and early 90s will remember asking for these toys as gifts. As such, it was always a thrill to find them under the tree at Christmas time or unwrapping them as a welcome birthday surprise. With an already wide range of offerings spanning 1982 and 1983, it became clear that you couldn't have too much of a good thing, as proven by yet another extended lineup of figures and vehicles for the year that would follow. So let's look back at the history of G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero in its third year, and re-experience the greatness of what this toy line had to offer in 1984. Let's begin. It's clear that 1984 was a glorious year in the history of toys. The often discussed Big Three Boys toy lines of the 1980s truly kicked into high gear during this time. That's because Masters of the Universe was reaching the height of its popularity, what with an incredible cast of figures, vehicles, and playsets. It was also the year that Hasbro elected to import the Japanese Takara-based Diaclone and Microchange line of toys into US markets, unifying and branding them as the Transformers. Of course, the Transformers as a pop culture phenomenon has been a source of continuous strength in both toy and media sales right up to this day. In addition, Hasbro had G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, already firmly established in what was now a growing, crowded space at retail. Yes, Star Wars was now in the twilight years of its run, and new lines such as Kenner Superpowers were filling the void. Yet despite all that, this 3 3/4 inch military sci-fi mashup still found a way to stand out amongst all these big, amazing brands. G.I. Joe would of course go on to become a timeless franchise, and it's no coincidence that with the rising tide that was this toy line, the entire genre of pop culture was also on the rise, and the box office would treat us to tons of rewatchable classics. Not to mention wonderful hit songs on the radio that would get continuous airplay in the decades that would follow, and also the debut of some great television shows for the small screen in between your Saturday morning or after-school cartoon routine. As for your playtime battlefield adventures and the action figures within your toy chest, G.I. Joe had no equal. In addition to its already great articulation, the swivel arm feature introduced the G.I. Joe figure bodies the prior year was back and would be a fixture in this line of toys for the remainder of its run. For 1984, we'd be treated to 10 heroes and a re-release of the team's Field Commander, now in carded form, as well as 9 villains for a total of 20 figures. We'd get these figures by way of individual cards, as drivers or pilots with their vehicles, and as mail-in offers. And of course, there was a whole range of vehicles and small playsets added this year as well. When we left off in 1983, among the range of characters was a mail-in offer for Duke. As mentioned just a moment ago, his 1984 release would be pretty much identical to his release the prior year, albeit now lacking the American flag sticker that came with the mail-away. Fluent in multiple languages, Duke commands a ton of respect among his peers, what with being among those to turn down the prestige of an officer's commission, feeling his natural place perpetually is on the battlefield among his troops. While being a hard-nosed sergeant in the comics, Duke was very much the poster boy for the Sunbow cartoon, leading many missions as the face of G.I. Joe on the front lines. Of course, G.I. Joe would have several iconic characters each year, and one could argue that Roadblock was every bit as important to the Joe's roster and almost equally as recognized as Duke. The team's heavy machine gunner, Roadblock sported quite the loadout for a figure of this scale with his signature Ma Deuce. And while he can be your typical tough guy and muscle of the team, he had a softer side too, what with being the team's expert chef who loves to cook a meal for his friends. Featured heavily in pretty much all forms of G.I. Joe media, and very much an alternate poster boy for the franchise throughout various incarnations, Roadblock was also one of the key characters in the G.I. Joe movie that would air just a few years after 1984. Expanding the range of G.I. Joe into warmer temperatures, the team's flamethrower, Blowtorch, was also introduced in this year. The loadout with his oxygen mask, his M7 pack, and flamethrower give him a fierce look for Cobra forces to get out of his way on the battlefield. In any case, Blowtorch would rather be on the offensive end rather than the receiving end of fire, which is too bad for Cobra. And in terms of other unique specialties, the high altitude, low opening, or halo jumper named Ripcord would also make his way into this wave of G.I. Joe figures. With no fear of high altitudes, Ripcord is a natural fit to augment G.I. Joe air-based vehicles overall. What with being a stretch goal for the 2021 Sky Striker HasLab campaign that scaled with the 3¾ inch vintage figures shown in this video, as well as having that same Night Force version but now in 6-inch scale as part of the HasLab Dragonfly campaign. And since G.I. Joe seemingly operates in pretty much any terrain or battlefield type, why not have a jungle trooper named Recondo? Looking at his design aesthetic, this is a brilliantly sculpted figure and maybe the most gorgeous figure in the entire range of G.I. Joe's 12-year vintage run. And that's saying a lot. Sporting a green rifle and backpack, Recondo is right at home in the jungle, out in the wild, and cutting through bushes. He's yet another versatile character for your battlefield playtime adventures, and do note as well the variations that exist for Rekondo's camouflage pattern on his pants. So if you own one, have a look at which variant is in your collection. Another signature of G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, is their use of animal companions within a toy line. This became evident starting right here in 1984, what with the canine dog handler Mutt and his companion Junkyard. Mutt has a natural affinity for animals, and their relationship would play out in parts of the Sunbow animated cartoon series. Mutt's loadout is quite detailed, what with having a silencer, a leash, as well as a helmet with a face mask. Don't lose some of the smaller accessories, as they will be hard to replace. Also sporting the animal theme this year was one Charlie Iron Knife, codenamed Spirit, also known as the team's Native American tracker. A shaman and medicine man, Spirit always spoke with wisdom behind his words and is popular as a standout character in the vintage line. Just like Mutt's dog Junkyard, Spirit's eagle, known as Freedom, is an important staple to the character. Be careful though with Freedom's claws, as they do detach easily and are frequently lost when buying vintage versions of him. Moving on with vehicle drivers, we have Thunder, or the self-propelled gun artilleryman. Try saying that 3 times fast. Someone who's oddly fond of loud noises as indicated by his file card, Thunder came packed in with the Slugger tank, a relatively compact vehicle with a large cannon and not too many small easily losable parts compared to other vehicles of this era. But as far as his figure goes, Thunder does have some easily losable accessories like his monocle, visor, and headset, so if you do happen to find a Thunder complete at a good price, be sure to snag it. Interestingly, he has a unique secondary ability as listed on his file card, being listed as a rock band drummer. And making his return to the lineup was Clutch. While he was already packed in with the original Vamp during 1982, this is a tan version of him along with the Vamp Mark II. A mechanic by trade who eventually served as a G.I. Joe transportation and infantry specialist, Clutch is among the earliest characters in the G.I. Joe lineup to get more than one version released in the opening years of the franchise. The Vamp Mark II uses a lot of the original styling from the first Vamp, but now adds a roof and doors as well as a missile rack. Some fans like this version better than the classic OD Green release. As we transition from land to sea, a few naval-based vehicle operators made their way into this series, namely the hovercraft pilot and graduate of the Coast Guard Academy known as Cutter. Like most vehicle operators, Cutter didn't come with any accessories for this first release. The blue color on his shirt does fade easily, so be sure to snag one if you find one without sun fading for a decent price. The Killer Whale, or Warrior Hovering Assault Launching Envoy, is about as iconic as they come in terms of G.I. Joe vehicles. Some would even rank this every bit as iconic as a Sky Striker or a HISS tank, and that's certainly high praise. It does come with a ton of parts, including some easily breakable, fragile ones, especially the vanes and associated back propeller components, just to name a few. It was unique in that it also came with some smallish vehicles like a recon bike as well as a sea sled, and packed in a ton of features such as a working propeller and a ramp compartment to hide some Joes in. Oh, and it could also float in water. So anyway, the overall size of this thing occupies a ton of shelf space. As far as the 1984 lineup goes, it is the largest G.I. Joe item in this wave. And rounding out the Joes lineup is Deep Six. Now, this is a larger, bulkier figure with a severe lack of articulation when compared to the other Joes, with articulation only being present at his 2 shoulder joints. That being said, he does stand out on a display shelf at least. Another who was heavily featured in the cartoon, Deep Six is among the team's divers, much like Torpedo and Wetsuit. Deep Six was packed in with the Shark, or Submersible High-Speed Attack and Reconnaissance Craft, a smaller vehicle among the Joes' arsenal. The Shark was unique in that it could also travel as an aerial vehicle, even if it was more commonly known for being a capable and maneuverable sea vehicle. And while we have discussed the heroes that comprise this year's action figure lineup, it's worth noting that Cobra the Enemy got a significantly expanded roster this year as well. Continuing with the theme of figures packed in with vehicles, we got the introduction of a very unique character who would play a vital role for the G.I. Joe franchise in the years to come. And I've brought in our resident Dreadnok expert to talk more about it.
1984 brought many iconic figures to the G.I. Joe brand. The most iconic, in my opinion, is Zartan, the Master of Disguise. Designed by legendary creator Ron Rudat and brought to life through the file card by Larry Hama, Zartan was unlike any other action figure because of his color-changing feature, but also because of how he was depicted in the file card. Thanks to Carson from 3D Joe's in an interview with Kirk Blazigian, Kirk described how Plastic Vendor had showed the Hasbro team color-changing plastic, and it was decided that they had to figure out a way of using this color-changing plastic in a toy. Thus, Zartan was born. With this feature, Zartan could change color from a flesh tone to a bluish-green in direct sunlight. This feature was also added to the Chameleon Swamp Skier. Zartan and the Chameleon Swamp Skier were packaged together and given a $5 price point. Perfect for kids. I remember bargaining with my mom at the time on what chores I would complete so that she would buy me this toy, which I had to have, and thus Zartan became my favorite character and figure. Zartan came with a number of accessories, including a chest plate and easily lost knee pads, which did also include decals that could change color. His backpack held the mask, which would allow him to change or disguise himself, as well as a laser pistol. The Swamp Skier included a storage box, amazing articulation with the skis. The Chameleon could also be taken apart and made to look like scrap, and with the mask completed the Master of Disguise, which would allow Zartan to slip away from the Joe team unnoticed. With Larry Hama adding the depth to Zartan's character in the file card, you would not only understand that he was a master of makeup and disguise, but he could also blend into any background. He was a trained ventriloquist, acrobat, and contortionist. He could also speak 20 languages and dialects. He was a master of the martial arts, and it was also rumored that he was trained at a prestigious military academy. The initial run of the file card also provided a psychological profile, which described Zartan as having extreme paranoid schizophrenia. There was backlash against Hasbro and Zartan because of the inclusion of the paranoid schizophrenia, and Hasbro agreed to remove the psychological profile moving forward on the file cards at the request of the Mental Health Association of Indiana. Zartan, like Despero, did not work directly for Cobra. Instead, he was the mercenary for hire. And in 1985 and 86, Zartan filled out his Dreadnoks. They included such members as Buzzer, Ripper, Torch, his brother and sister Zorana, and Xandar, which also included his color-changing feature. There was Thrasher and Monkey Wrench, and of course, the Thunder Machine. Hasbro continued to add more and more Dreadnoks through the years as time went on. Zartan is also the only vehicle driver that was included in the cross-sell artwork on the G.I. Joe action figures. Zartan was depicted in a painting with a floating mask. Even though Zartan was never sold in a single carded figure in the US or Europe, and the only place you could find a single carded Zartan was in Japan, Takara had licensed the line from Hasbro, and they had put Zartan on a single carded figure. To this day, Zartan is and probably will always be my favorite G.I. Joe character, and inclusion of the Dreadnoks just makes me love this team even more. They're a ragtag band of mercenaries, a hodgepodge group of just messed up people, but I think for a lot of us, it's home. And that's why I think Zartan is the most iconic figure in the 1984 line. Thanks again, everybody. Dreadnok Ryan signing off, and Ken, thanks a lot for letting me talk about my favorite figure.
Continuing with the swamp theme is Copperhead. A swamp vehicle operator with his file card listing him as a gambler by nature, Copperhead did come in paint schemes of slight variation, depending on whether you got an earlier or later release, of course. In particular, the version of him with the darker gloves is the harder one to find and naturally carries more value on the open market. Copperhead comes packed in with the Cobra Water Moccasin, a small cruiser boat for your Cobras to hang out, assuming of course it doesn't get crushed by the much larger G.I. Joe killer whale. Transitioning back to land, the Vamp Mark II would meet its match with the Cobra Stinger, a four-wheel drive night attack vehicle. While it looks like a black redeco of the Vamp Mark II, do take note of the missile rack being in a different mold, so it's clear that some retooling was done here. The Cobra Stinger would come with a recolored version of the Cobra Officer, namely the Stinger Driver, who would sport a predominantly gray color scheme. And taking to the skies, the Sky Striker would meet its match this year, what with the release of the Cobra Rattler ground attack jet in this 1984 year. Packed in with a ton of missiles and the sleek dark blue Cobra scheme, you wouldn't want to be on the ground when this thing starts dropping bombs. It's one of the most detailed vehicles in the vintage range. Wild Weasel was the pilot packed in with the Rattler and has become every bit as iconic, if not more so, than G.I. Joe's resident air pilot, Ace. Interestingly, Wild Weasel would also be packed in with later releases of the Palitoy Action Force Roboskull, subbing in for the earlier release that had the Red Wolf pilot. Cobra would also get its first female figure this year with the intelligence officer known as the Baroness. Speaking with a noticeable European accent in the cartoon, the Baroness is a very high-ranking member of Cobra and can often be found side by side with the arms dealer detailed in the previous year of G.I. Joe, known as Destro. No matter the form of G.I. Joe media, Baroness features heavily as a character. Her intelligence specialty played out heavily in the two-part series in the cartoon known as Worlds Without End, where an alternate universe version of her was shown to be a double agent, working publicly for Cobra but maintaining undercover status and helping out the Joes. Moving on to Scrap Iron, who sure gave you some bang for your buck if you managed to find him in stores, since he came with a lot in the way of accessories, particularly large ones. An anti-armor tank destroyer by trade, Scrap Iron is a weapons product designer whose signature weapon is the multi-piece missile system that he comes with. This was worked into more of a miniature tank look for his much later G.I. Joe classified 6-inch appearance, though his original vintage missile weapon system is a stationary system. Don't lose his small pistol or the rubber remote activator accessory, as it takes a lot of pieces to keep this bad guy complete. And with already so many signature villains released in this year, we still have Firefly. Listed as a saboteur by his trade, Firefly was actually quite versatile all around and could make for a deadly assassin. A demolitions and munitions expert as well, Firefly also had some ninja training as part of his background. Decked out in his urban camo, Firefly is a mercenary's mercenary, and is most definitely a fan favorite amongst G.I. Joe collectors. His walkie-talkie accessory is among the hardest to find in the G.I. Joe range, and carries a hefty value to help complete the figure, so try not to lose it if you have one. And as deadly as Firefly is, one might argue that he's not even the most skilled assassin Cobra had released this year. That's because many people would give that honor to Storm Shadow. Trained as a member of the Arashikage, much like Snake Eyes as a ninja, Storm Shadow is probably the only equal to Snake Eyes in terms of hand-to-hand combat, and that also includes matching him in terms of martial arts, bladed weaponry skills. A true ninja by the most old-school definition, he has known Snake Eyes since a young age, developing an almost sibling rivalry of sorts. While usually associated with Cobra, Storm Shadow's loyalties have changed and have been tested over the years, what with switching sides to G.I. Joe and being listed as a member of G.I. Joe in later releases. Rounding out the character range for 1984 is the version 2 release of the Cobra leader, namely Cobra Commander. This is actually a mail-away exclusive, so naturally he was released as a bag to mail in, much like other figures that were traded in for a small amount of change and some of your old-school flagpoint cutouts. Interestingly, he continued to be featured as a mail-away offer for the remainder of the 1980s and even through to the early 1990s, making this figure actually easier to obtain than his previous helmeted release. And on that note, his hooded appearance matches that of Cobra Commander when he's back at Cobra headquarters in the Sunbow cartoon, as he was more frequently shown with his helmeted and face shield appearance if he was out in the field of battle. Like the previous version 1 and version 1.5 figure, his small weapon can tab into his back for storage. Now, we've talked about some vehicles here already, particularly the ones that came packed in with drivers or pilots. That said, there's still several more released this year. You've got the Skyhawk, listed as the one-man VTOL or vertical takeoff and landing aircraft with its rotatable engines, which was a smaller, slightly more affordable vehicle in this range for the good guys. The Vamp Mark I and the HAL or Heavy Artillery Laser made a reappearance this year while being sold separately in prior years, but now being sold together as a Sears exclusive box set. And the Joes also had the Manta, or the Marine Assault Nautical Transport Air Driven. And yes, that is the acronym. This was a mail-in exclusive that required 5 flag points and $1 in the mail. A great small item for your G.I. Joe Windsurfer missions. Cobra had its share of small vehicles as well, such as the ASP, or ASP if you prefer, which stood for Assault System Pod. This one had multiple options for the cockpit position and was also able to be towed by other Cobra vehicles. There was also the Cobra Claw, or Covert Light Aerial Weapon, which was a small glider of sorts with foldable wheels. And whether done by intention or not, these claw gliders could tab easily onto the bottom level of the Terrordrome's doors, the Cobra headquarters of course that would appear in 1986 as a toy release. Another feature that would be a staple of G.I. Joe in this vintage era were the battle stations, which were essentially small playsets serving a specific purpose. You had the Bivouac, one of the more aesthetically pleasing small sets that G.I. Joe had to offer, though it's also one with a lot of accessories that kids could easily lose. This of course makes complete ones all the more desirable. You also had the Mountain Howitzer, which was a mobile all-terrain item with a ton of firepower. It also had some small parts, albeit not quite as many as the Bivouac. And of course, you had the Watchtower, good for both watch duty or for serving as a sniper position. Packed in with the ever-so-patriotic American flag, and come to think of it, the Watchtower would look great next to the 1983 headquarters. And similar to these small battle stations were what G.I. Joe termed as battlefield accessories, basically small defense units. You had the machine gun defense unit, something that would naturally look good with a gunner type of character. There was also the ever-so-cool missile defense unit with its missile launcher and its crate full of spare missiles, and the mortar defense unit, which came with its 10 sandbags, the mortar itself, as well as the drum and gas cans. All in all, there was a certain collectible charm that these small sets had. G.I. Joe also released the second Battle Gear pack, which was loaded with a ton of weapons, helmets, backpacks, and even a few figure stands, all in different colors from their original releases. The Battle Gear accessory packs would become another year-to-year staple in this era of G.I. Joe. 1984 would also see a small assortment of paint-a-figurine vinyl items, which were blank-colored items you could just paint up on your own with the character options of either Duke or Zartan. The cartoon would also see a second miniseries as a follow-up to the prior year's 5-parter. This new 5-part series would be called The Revenge of Cobra and focused on G.I. Joe and Cobra's struggles over the high-tech device known as the Weather Dominator. The Marvel comic run, as written by Larry Hama, would also see some significant events in this calendar year. The death of General Flag at the hands of Major Blood would occur in issue number 19, and shortly after we'd see the now iconic and ever popular issue number 21, which is known to us as the Silent Interlude, an issue completely devoid of dialogue and largely focusing on Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. Overseas, G.I. Joe's 3 3/4 equivalent Action Force made by Palitoy would release another series of sub-team based heroes and villains. As such, we'd see more characters bolstering the ranks of the Z-Force, Space Force, Q-Force, and SAS. The Red Shadows would also get a few upgrades, including the aforementioned signature vehicle known as the Robo-Skull. Unfortunately, Palitoy's design department was shuttered in this 1984 year, and subsequent years of Action Force would see releases of figures largely, and in some cases entirely, identical to the US-dominated G.I. Joe style, thus putting an end to the predominantly 5 points of articulation style of figure. And there you have the history of G.I. Joe, a real American hero in the year of 1984. Do share in the comments section below if you owned any of these figures in your youth, and tell everyone who your favorite figure and what your favorite vehicle or playset from this year is. And if you enjoyed this video, don't go anywhere just yet. You can have a look at another G.I. Joe history video by clicking on this link right over here. Or for a look at an altogether different toy history video, you can click right over here. And with that, yo Joe, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks again, and take care.